a reminder, Salesforce is a publicly traded company, so please base your purchasing decisions on current products and services and not on any forward-looking statements that we may be making. Hello, I'm Jennifer Lee, Lead Admin Evangelist at Salesforce, and welcome to our August Automate This episode. Super excited to have you with us. And if you miss anything in this broadcast, watch the video on demand back on the same page. And engage with us during the live stream, in the chat, or in the comments afterwards. Set that reminder on the live stream episode page. That's the best way to be notified when we go live. And you'll also get an email reminder on the day of the event. To interact with other viewers in the chat live, and then to engage with me or my guest presenters, start your comment with a Q colon so that we can easily scan through, identify, and answer your questions. So here's what we'll learn in today's episode from our two guest presenters. What you'll learn from Josh is how to provide a better UI, UX when getting records and displaying them to your users. How simple custom components can provide a ton of value. And then what's next for Data Fetcher. 3 things we'll learn from Michelle is what types of screen components currently support reactivity, how reactive formulas can be used to automatically calculate values and display them in screen flow fields, and how other types of formulas like text formulas can be used to create dynamic default field values. All right, so today we're going to talk about how to take your screen flows to the next level with reactivity. I'm excited to be joined by some long-term Flownatics, Salesforce MVP Golden Hoodie recipient and returning presenter Michelle Hansen, Solution Architect at Salesforce Josh Dayment, and returning Automation PM Adam White. So hello, Michelle, Josh, and Adam. Happy to have you on Automate This.
Thank you.
Hey, Jen.
Hey.
All right. So we're going to start off with Josh first. Welcome to your first Automate This. Tell us how you started your flow journey.
Yeah, so my flow journey is always a fun one. It started when I was a fresh Salesforce admin. At my previous company, I had mistakenly merged around 135,000 contacts and made quite a mess. We always get that one big mistake, and that was my one that I learned from. But it also opened up doors to learning about flow. Part of my cleanup efforts, I had a lot of tasks that were assigned to incorrect contacts as a result of that merge. And a lot of times I would get a case where, hey, this task needs to be on John Smith at XYZ company, not John Smith at ABC. So I would go in, I would update that, and then I'd find that there's probably about 10 or 15 tasks that are actually on the wrong contact. So I was doing all of this work manually. And it was painstaking, and I had a good mentor and a good teacher that said, hey, why don't you just build yourself a quick little screen flow where you could just select all of the tasks that you want to move and move them to that new contact. And this was in the old Flow Cloud Designer, the older version before we had Lightning flows. So it was a little bit more clunky, a little bit more complicated, but that flow right there just turn on that light bulb in my head of like, we really need to just automate everything. That makes sense too. So.
Great. And since then, what cool automation solutions have you built?
Oh man, I have built so many. One of the most popular ones that I got to demo through Automation Hour actually was a screen flow that I built for a Experience Cloud site that allowed people to search for MBA candidates as part of a program called MBA Veterans. So I utilized a lot of Apex actions, some custom screen components, and regular standard flow functionality to provide a really cool search functionality that will return candidates with a picture, with a quick little bio, all on individual cards, all on a screen flow that recruiters and hiring managers could interact with and see those candidates and then reach out to those candidates and communicate all within a screen flow. Very large flow, but very cool, I think.
Awesome. And what advice do you have for people starting to learn flow?
Don't be intimidated. I think everybody's intimidated when we first start learning about it. And I think we always have some type of intimidation, but just don't be. It's the best kind of advice, and reach out for help. Like to this day, like even this morning, I'm working on an implementation right now where I went back to the team that I'm working with and I said, hey, does this make sense? And just got feedback. It's, we love to talk about customer 360. Think of admin 360. Mm-hmm. Get feedback from your teammates, get feedback from end users, get feedback from everybody on, does this logic make sense or does this screen make sense?
Great. Thanks, Josh. All right. Hi, Michelle. Great to have you back.
Well, hey, Jen. Good to see you again.
Now, Josh mentioned Automation Hour. Let's take a half a second to explain what that is and how you're involved with that.
Well, gosh, Jen, as if you don't know, since I took the reins over from you as co-host, Automation Hour is a bi-weekly webinar that we host for the Salesforce community to come and learn about all things automation. This year, we've turned it into a boot camp to help everyone learn flow. But we have traditionally showcased really cool automations that Salesforce professionals in the ecosystem have built using all the automation tools, Apex, Flow, even Workflow Rules and Process Builder back in the day. We just want to be able to help others learn and inspire them with the cool things that others have built that you may be able to leverage for use in your work.
Awesome. And they can get more information at automationhour.com. All right.
Absolutely.
So if you haven't watched the past episodes that Michelle guest presented, check out the URLs that you see below on your screen. So Michelle, how did you get started with your flow journey?
I tripped and fell into a Salesforce admin job. I was actually using it as an end user, and my boss came and said, you're pretty good with this Salesforce thing, and our admin could use some help. Do you want to be a part-time admin? And I went, sure. Not realizing that what I was doing was starting my career. The first project I ever started working on was a flow. So I didn't really know you were supposed to be intimidated by it, to Josh's point earlier. And I have been a Flownatic ever since. Something just clicked, and I think it's the best thing in the world. So I'm thrilled to be able to help share and teach others about it.
So I know you've built a lot of automation solutions. What would be the coolest ones that you want to point out?
Well, honestly, the one I'm about to demo, I think, is one that is probably in my top 3. Some of the other ones that I have built that I'm very proud of was one that actually allowed my users to go to a screen and select specific records they wanted to create for follow-up. And because these were also auto-generated when they would build quotes with products, I built in duplicate management to ensure that we weren't duplicating these records. And I was able to do it in such a way that I leveraged custom metadata to be able to bring in dynamic default field values based on specific criteria. I think that's another one that I'm very proud of. And then probably rounding out my top 3 was the Goldilocks solution that I built. We needed something that wasn't quite CPQ, but we needed more flexibility than what Sales Cloud could offer for pricing models, which is just list price times quantity. So with a series, again, of custom metadata and flow, I was able to build a pricing wizard that can handle about 7 different pricing models. So that was pretty cool too.
All right. So you mentioned custom metadata. So there might be some admins out there who've never heard of it. So what is that?
So custom metadata is just as simple as a custom object, but instead of it being a custom object that you build for your users to interact with, to put data in, It's specifically in setup and designed to be an object that you build for admins to be able to put data in that's used to more control how your system functions or flows. So doing things like being able to pull in email addresses that I don't want to hard code in a flow, but I want to be able to direct that traffic, or using that to hold the values for pricing models and be able to figure out which pricing model information I need to pull out of those custom metadata records and into my flow to be able to tell it exactly how to calculate pricing. Those are just some of the things that you can do with custom metadata. Honestly, the sky's the limit. And of course, get your start on Trailhead like I did. Once you figure out what custom meta can do, it is absolutely the Swiss Army knife that just everything you do, you find a use for custom metadata.
An admin superpower to have.
Yes, it is.
What advice do you have for admins trying to learn Flow?
So I think I'm going to echo Josh. You can get intimidated, but you don't need to. There's plenty of resources out there. There's plenty of people to help you. There's lots of great courses, wonderful communities, lots of experts that have dedicated their time and resources to helping you learn Flow. But really, it's about thinking through the steps logically. I like to tell people we're teaching robots how to make peanut butter and jelly sandwiches. You know, the things that you would assume a human can just understand, robots need to be told. So it's some of those things where you have to take a step back sometimes and think through the steps very logically. And that's where I think building it out ahead of time, like on a screen somewhere, Lucidchart, or even like sticky notes and a whiteboard I used to use to kind of build out those logic steps first really helps. And then you can kind of translate that into Flow Builder.
Great. Thanks, Michelle.
Sure.
All right, Josh, I would love to learn more about Datafetcher. How did you come up with the idea for that?
Yeah, so Datafetcher, it was a unique opportunity. Adam had actually reached out to me, I think December of last year, about preparing for TDX. I had a little bit of downtime, and what we were trying to do is leading up to TDX, where Adam was thinking of use cases for, how can we really show reactivity and the impact that it has. There's an existing component on unofficial SF called Data Polar that does similar functionality that would pull records inside of your system based off of SOCWL out on a set amount of time. However, that's not very best practice. So we looked at how can we take this and how can I make it into something that a user is interacting with on a flow screen and return those records. And then Datafetcher was kind of born from there. Used a similar model, however, made it performant and better overall for Adam's demos at TDX, and then decided to put it on Salesforce Labs on the AppExchange for everybody to use. Because for me, I think it's one of the cooler components that I've used recently, and I'm actually using it in a customer project right now.
So, can you show us how to use it?
Yeah, absolutely. Would love to. Let me get my screen going. All right. So I created a very simple flow or use case for Datafetcher right now. Like I said, Datafetcher is going to do two things. You can do two things right now in Datafetcher, and that's perform a SOCL query or perform an aggregate SOCL query, or do both. For those unfamiliar, an aggregate SOCL query is and SOCL is Salesforce Object Query Language. Developers will use SOCL to replace a get records, like what those of us are using Flow use. But an aggregate SOCL is basically, it takes a set of numbers, or it will count a number of records and return a number for you, or perform simple math. And a SOCL will return records into a collection or a single record for Datafetcher. But my flow, basically what I want to do is I want a user to select a state, and I want the user to select an industry, and then I want to return any opportunity that comes back based off of those two criteria and show them to me in a data table. Before ScreenFlow, reactive ScreenFlows, and before Datafetcher, I could have done this by having multiple screens in my flow with a couple of get steps or decisions, things like that. However, with reactive ScreenFlows and Datafetcher, my flow now consists of a single screen. So how I have this configured is I'm using a pick list component. One thing to note is that the out-of-the-box pick list for reactivity, it's supported in winter 24. So if you're still on summer 23, it's not quite there yet, but it's all coming very soon. So I do have a pick list where I'm just using the state codes from the account object, and then I have an industry one where I am using the industry pick list from the industry object. I wanted to keep it really simple for today's demo. And then in Datafetcher, like I said, I'm going to do two things for this demo. I wanted to get a summary of the value or the amount of all of the opportunities that are going to get returned from my Sasol query. And then I just wanted a Sasol query so I can show all of the opportunities in my data table. And I'll show you what these formulas look like here in a second. But configuration for the Datafetcher component is very simple. API name, I'm going to select the object that I want to return from my query. And then optionally, I can do an aggregate Sasol query, and I'm actually going to use a formula to return this query because I want to have the user interact with my ScreenFlow to build my queries. So that's where reactive formulas come into play. And then once again, my Sasol query. This is going to be the query that I use to return the records into my data table component. And then data table, I have one more formula that I'm going to use, and that's data table label, and I'll show you why here in a second. And first collection, and then I'm just going to be returning the name, account ID, stage, and amount for these specific opportunities. So real quick, let's take a look at the three formulas that we created that are making up part of our Datafetcher component. First one of those is going to be my aggregate query. So the aggregate query input on Datafetcher is going to be looking for a text string to perform that query against. So what I'm saying here is I want to select the sum amount from opportunity where the account billing state is equal to the state that gets selected, and the account industry is equal to the industry that the user is going to select in the ScreenFlow. So very simple. You can do very complex aggregate queries as well, and I've seen quite a few out there. I have an office hours actually set up for Datafetcher, so if you go to the AppExchange listing and you have questions or need help, I'm available to help answer those as well. But as we can see, very simple. And then my query formula, very similar, where I'm selecting the ID, the name, account ID, amount, and stage name from the opportunity where the account billing state is equal to the selected state in my ScreenFlow, and the account industry is the selected industry in my ScreenFlow. For those that are newer to formulas or that might be newer to Sasol, one of the biggest things that I see people making the mistake is the data types that we come across. So industry is text. So that means I have to include a single quote that we see right here and right here around the industry. If this was a number, for example, that I was going to be returning in my Sasol, or if industry wasn't a number field, there wouldn't be any single quotes around that number, so I wouldn't need those single quotes. So just recommend that if you start running into some errors, make sure that you're configuring your Sasol query and your aggregate query to the correct format and the correct data types. And the help documents from the Salesforce developer website is actually really good. Example use cases is actually how I tested a lot of this functionality, is actually stealing some of the formulas, or I'm sorry, some of the Sasol statements from the developer site. And then one more, my data table label. This is the label that's going to show up at the top of my data table. We're just going to say, here's the list of opportunities where the account is in the selected state. And the total value for these opportunities is my aggregate query result. Once again, that's going to return a number. So since I'm returning data type as text in my text formula, I did have to wrap that in text in order to get that value to show properly in my formula. So really briefly, that is how it's all configured. Let's take a look at how this works. And I'm going to do it in debug. This is just one of those habits that I have. I very rarely will hit run from the flow canvas, because I love to see on the right-hand side exactly what my flow is doing and help me troubleshoot as far as why a flow is or is not working. So let's go ahead and select a state, and then we can select an industry, and there we are. I have a opportunity, an account ID, a stage, and if I had an amount on this opportunity, it would show there. So let's go ahead and change this up really quick. And there we are. As we can see now, all without leaving the screen, I was able to change the state, I was able to change the industry, and I was actually able to return a different set of opportunities I can use further down in my flow. I'm also able to see what the total value for all of these opportunities is right now via the aggregate query that Datafetcher returned in conjunction with reactive formulas inside of my ScreenFlow. So we can see here's a list of opportunities where the account is in California, and the total value of these opportunities is $120,000. If I look here, that math adds up. So everything worked as expected. Now if I click finish, once again, I like to see how everything got returned in my flow. So in Datafetcher, it's actually going to show me what query was used to do my aggregate query, and it's going to show me what query was used to return my records at the time of completion of my flow, and then also my results. Datafetcher not only is going to return a record collection, but it's also going to return a single record for you as well. It's going to return that first retrieved record in there, and then we're good to go. I'm going to pause there and see if you have any questions on just regular Datafetcher functionality before I show you what I'm working on as far as my roadmap goes for Datafetcher. All right, we did Sasol query, right? We did Salesforce object query language. Another big popular feature that I think in the developer community as a whole is the ability to do Sasol. Sasol is Salesforce object search language. It's the same type of functionality that somebody uses inside of global search inside Salesforce. So if I start typing in the words Josh in a global search bar, Salesforce is automatically going to start returning records that contain the word Josh in it across multiple fields. So I thought to myself, how cool would it be if I could do that in Flow? So I started working on Datafetcher 2. What we see here right now, this is going to be version 2.0 for Datafetcher, where we're going to include the ability to do a Sasol query string to return not just one, but two different S-object types inside of your ScreenFlow based off of the text or pick lists, what have you, however you want to build that formula or that query string or search string in your flow to return records of 2 different object types right now. That's what I'm supporting. That I'll be supporting in Datafetcher 2.0. But I have some work to do to make this good and usable for admins, developers, architects alike. But I did want to just kind of highlight this really quickly to kind of give you a taste of what's to come. So this flow, I have just a text area plus component that I've also created to enter in some text. I'm going to enter in a search term. And then in Datafetcher 2.0, I now have a new input property called Sasol query string. So it's going to be my Sasol formula, and then I have 2 data tables. One is going to be for their search results coming 1, and then search results 2 coming out of Datafetcher. And as you can see here, I'm choosing 2 different objects now. I'm choosing an account and a contact. So I'm going to search across both accounts and contacts to return records. How that formula looks is a little bit different than a Sasol formula. So Sasol formula is going to do a find option. So we're putting in find, and then it's going to be the value from my text area plus component that I have there. And I'm going to look in all fields, returning the account ID and name and the contact ID, name, and account ID. That I'm going to return into my 2 data tables. So let's go ahead and let's try this. Let's see if this this returns what we think it will. As you can see, I'm working on some UI updates. But it's a good error because Datafetcher is telling me that my search term needs to be longer than 1 character in order to do a Sasol search. So as I start typing, my error message goes away, and I see I don't have any accounts that include Josh, but I do have 3 contacts that have Josh in the name. If I change this up, I can do Edge, so it's going to return Edge Communications and account. And if we look at the IDs here, we can see that Sean Forbes and Rose Gonzalez are both members of the Edge Communications account. As I'm reactively in real time searching against my database to return 2 objects in one flow on a single screen, without the need for next, previous, additional gets, other variables. I'm using all automated output variables from my screen components and doing all these searches live. But that's on the roadmap. I still have a lot of work to do, but it will be coming soon. But that's what I got.
Thank you, Josh. What a neat tool. So can you tell us how folks can get their hands on it?
Yeah, absolutely. Like I said earlier, definitely made that decision to put it on the AppExchange so everybody can use it. So what you're going to want to do is go to the AppExchange, search for Datafetcher, 2 words, and you'll see the listing there. And then down right below, everybody sees the link directly to the listing there, and give it a roll. Make sure to install it in a developer or sandbox first. Make sure that it works for your use case, and it's good to go.
Great. Thanks, Josh.
It's been fun.
Okay, Michelle, can you share with us your use case and solution?
Yeah, absolutely. So one of the other things besides Automate This that I do in the community is I'm part of the planning committee for Midwest Dreamment. And with any Dreamment event comes a need to have a lot of sponsorships. And so I wanted to try and see if I could come up with a way to streamline kind of this sponsorship opportunity process for our org. We're all volunteers. We're all doing this in addition to our day jobs. So the faster and easier we can do it, the better. And hopefully maybe someday this will actually morph into something I can throw into an experience site to have more of a self-service type of solution. So with that, let's dive in. And I always like to show how it works and then get into the guts. So I'm going to just hop on into my org here. And so I've built this to be pretty flexible, and I've got it both as an app page as well as something that you can launch from a lead. So we're going to start with just an app page for Midwest Dreaming sponsorship. We're going to pull it up and it's going to give me my screen flow. And the great thing about this, and we'll talk about how this is built here in just a little bit, is this actually leverages Datafetcher. So Josh built this great component and I said, great, let me play with it and see how we can use it here. So I've been able to build a multi-step wizard all on a single page, so we don't have that next and click fatigue. So first things first, we have the option for an exhibit booth. If you would like to come and have a booth at our event, we'd love to have you. So if you choose a specific type of booth option here, let's say they're like, yeah, Dayment sounds great. It's got the demo jam included. We can see that we get a full page length description. There's 7 tickets included. But they're like, you know what, actually, we've had some budget cuts. Maybe we need to dial back a little bit. Let's go with gold. And so you'll notice as these selections are happening in my data table, not only is my booth selection and total down here changing to show what I've selected and what that total price is, but now that I've selected something that doesn't include the demo jam, we're offering it as an add-on option. So with this, if I toggle this on from declined to added, it's going to update again my exhibit booth price over here. So then step 2, if in addition to your exhibit booth or instead of you want to do a sponsorship, we can scroll through all of our sponsorship options here. So we can also say, hey, you know what? Lanyard sponsor sounds like something they're interested in. Let's go ahead and add that as well. And so you'll be able to see here that we've got a total for that lanyard sponsorship. The exhibit booth is still up here. And then once we get to our discount and total section, we can actually see the total amount of those two things combined. So I knew we were toying with the idea of adding some discounts. So I just wanted to put some basic functionality into this proof of concept to see how we could deal with discounts in the future. And so if we're offering discounts based on specific payment dates, then we need to know when they're committing to pay us to know what kind of discount we want to offer. So let's say they're like, yeah, you know what? We can actually get you paid by December 15th, 2023. So we can do it this year. We'd like to get that 10% discount. As soon as I'm entering this here, I can see that this is going to calculate over here and in real time display what that total is. Now, the really cool thing about this is I've actually been able to leverage the new Winter 24 features of having reactive display text. So all of these fields over here are actually display text, which means I can control the size, the font, the color, all of those different things to really make my screen pop, as opposed to just having kind of the simple field options that we have before. All right, so I'm through the third step in my wizard. I've gotten everything selected that we want for this particular customer. So now what I wanted to do is make it really easy for people to add in the company information. Now, we weren't doing this from a lead, so that could be because we're working with one of the few companies that we have in our database. We've gotten a new org, so there's not a whole lot of information in it yet. So we do assume with lead conversion that we're not creating duplicate accounts or contacts. But for here, I can also come through, and if we had a much larger database of accounts, which we eventually will, I would be able to then use this company name field to start narrowing down the list of accounts that I could choose from. So if it's something that exists in our database, so let's say I type in S, this is actually reacting with every character I type to only pull in what actually matches. And because I've done it with a like query in our Sasol query, it basically functions as a contained. So anything that had an S in it. So if I type another character like L, now I've gotten down to just slalom as the matching. So if I want to use slalom as my existing account, I can do that. So I'm just going to go ahead and click this here. Because it's an existing account, we hid all of those other fields like website, billing address, everything, because we already have that information in our account record. I don't need to recapture. Instead, is now under point of contact, I have a list that is also leveraging Datafetcher to give me a list of every single contact that's related to that account in my org. And again, I only have a few here in my demo org, but if I were doing this in a real org, this could get to be a pretty long list. So the cool thing again is using that Datafetcher, I can have it set so that every character I type in either one of these fields. So if I start with a B, I can narrow it down to just my first name starts or has a B somewhere in it. And then I can also do this with the last name. So if I go ahead and put J, So that's going to narrow me down to Brad Jackson. And so again, if I want, I can go ahead and choose that existing point of contact. And then I won't need to actually complete all of the information below. If I did need to add a new contact from here, I could absolutely do that by filling out the rest of their first and last name and the information below. I'm going to go ahead and select Brad here as my existing point of contact. The final field we have is actually showing me what the opportunity name is going to be based on everything that I've added in here from my screen. So Slalom is the account name. So we're going to pull that in here because I selected that from our data table. We've signed up for both an exhibitor and a sponsor selection. So I've got both of those, and I pulled custom metadata, one of my favorite admin superpowers, in to actually help me calculate all of those dates and other information, as well as what event is currently active. So what event are we soliciting sponsorships for? So I can use that to help me build any number of things in my org, like project plans, but also leverage it in the formulas that I'll show you in a minute for payment dates. So I'm going to go ahead and click Create Op. So we're asking it to do quite a few things behind the scenes. I'm going to go ahead and go to my opportunity here. And we'll be able to see that not only has it created my opportunity with that name, but my committed payment date is the close date. I've been able to set the stage that it's in. It's linked to the appropriate account. I've got my contact as my contact role, my primary, and then everything that we have selected in here, actually all 4 of those. We've got our exhibitor, our demo jam participant, our sponsorship, and then the discount that we're offering based on all of those items. So with that, now that we've kind of gone through and seen how it works in real life from the user perspective, let's dive into the flow. All right, so I've got this set up as a screen flow. Again, we're going to be able to launch it from a couple of different places. But the first things I'm going to do are going to pull the price book entries. And so I want to pull everything that I need for both my exhibit booths and my sponsorships. And then I'm using collection filters and sorts here to be able to put them into 2 separate data tables and sort them in the order that I want. So for exhibit booths, I want them kind of high to low, highest tier to lowest tier. And then for the sponsorships, I've done it in the order that we would kind of like them to be displayed there alphabetically. Because I need to use them individually, I went ahead and used 2 separate gets for my demo jam and my discount price book entry, so that if we need to pull that information in, we can do that. And then finally, I'm pulling the active event from my custom metadata. So if I open this up, you'll be able to see that active event is actually a checkbox that we have on our custom metadata record. And as long as that equals true, that's the record that I want to pull back to be able to leverage throughout our flow. But here's where the real magic begins. It's the sponsorship options screen. So let's open that and take a look here. Okay, so I have set this up with my display text. So I'm giving each of my sections a header so that we can put these steps in here. Then my display or my data table here is displaying the price book entries from the exhibit booth filter. So I filtered that collection down to just the exhibit booths and had that display here. So that's how we do that. And then I have conditional visibility rendering on both my display text and my toggle component, so that as long as the option selected in my data table, and it's a little tough to see over here, let me click into this condition. If the first selected row, since I only allow 1 row to be selected in my data table, as long as that equals false, the demo jam is not included, then I can go ahead and display that as well here. So after that, I'm leveraging formulas, which are reactive. And that's the real meat and potatoes here of these formulas, is how we get everything to be reactive. So I've got the formula for exhibit booth total here. As we continue to scroll down, I've got the other one for sponsorship amount. And then we're doing more formulas here for my dates, as well as my total sponsorships, my discount percentage, and the sponsorship with the discount included. So because we've got to get out of the screen to go look at those formulas, I wanted to kind of go through all of those at once here. But then we're going to jump over into the toolbar and just take a look at our formulas. If I take a look, my formulas for like prior year end, essentially what I'm doing is I'm taking the start date of my active event, and I'm saying what I want to do is I want to build a date using the year that active event is for, go back to the previous year, and then set 12/31 for the day and month. And that's how I'm building that formula here. So that doesn't have to be reactive. It's just a great way to not hard code things in. But where I do get really reactive is things like my sponsorship amount. So my formula for sponsorship amount is using the blank value function. And so what this actually does is it says, I'm going to specify a value that I want you to display, but if that happens to be empty, I want something else to put there instead. So in this case, I'm using the table that first selected row, the unit price field from that price book entry, as what I want to display. But if there hasn't been anything selected in that table yet, let's go ahead and put in 0. So that way it doesn't show anything blank on my screen. It's a better user experience, and I can control that. So if I go in here for my discount, then what I can see is I'm doing some things here that if I have put a committed payment date in that is earlier than or equal to my prior year end, I'm going to go ahead and calculate a 10% discount. If it's before the 5 months prior date, but after the other one, then go ahead and calculate a 5% discount. Otherwise, if the committed date is past that, we won't calculate a discount and that field will be 0. And then from there, if I get to my sponsorship with discount amount formula down here, hide that. Then this is just calculating all of that together and saying, all right, I want anything that was selected in my exhibit booth, otherwise put in 0. Then if we toggled the demo jam to on, put that unit price in there, otherwise again, add 0. And then finally take everything that is in my sponsorship table that's selected, add that unit price or 0, and then round it out by adding the discount, which would be a negative amount. So putting all of those things in here together is how we're able to calculate that. And because I'm using these input fields, this is what makes it reactive. So that's how we're actually able to leverage all of those reactive formulas to actually display different information as we're interacting with other components on the page. All right, so back to our screen. We'll get down to step 4 because this is where the magic starts with Data Fetcher. So what I've been able to do here is actually use this company name component, and we have it so that if we do launch it from a lead, I can pre-populate the information with the record ID data. So company name will be in here. And if we're not launching it, then anything that gets typed in here is going to be in my Data Fetcher query. And so as Josh showed us, the Sasol query is going to pull back the records. And then what I'm doing in my data table is I'm using the output, so the retrieved records from my Data Fetcher, to display in this. And that's how that table was able to actually change with every character that I typed in that field, because that formula in my Data Fetcher was making that Sasol query dynamic. We did the same thing down here for our contacts. So when I get to step 5, add the point of contacts, I have my first and last name fields. Again, Data Fetcher is using a query, a formula to build that query dynamically. And then we're displaying that output here from the retrieved records of this Data Fetcher component. So both of those have to be on the screen. And Josh actually taught me a really cool trick yesterday that you can hide the Data Fetcher from screen with conditional visibility. And if the Data Fetcher isn't actually on the screen, if it's hidden, the Data Fetcher doesn't run. So you have the ability to actually decide whether or not Data Fetcher pulls anything into your screen based on the conditional visibility of the Data Fetcher itself. I didn't have reason to use that in this particular demo, but I thought that was really cool and actually have leveraged that for a client project I'm working on right now. So again, we've got conditional visibility on all these fields so that they are showing if we don't actually have anything in the contact table selected. So as soon as I select an existing contact, I will no longer ask you to fill out these fields because we already have those on contact as the expectation there. All right, so let's go look at our formulas for the Data Fetcher. We have our account query and our contact query here. So this one's pretty simple. What I'm doing is I am building a text formula with some concatenation variables, and that's where the plus signs come in here. Now, because I have a mixture of literal text and some inputs, I have to actually include double quotes around all that literal text. So select name, billing city, and billing state. Those are the 3 fields that we're actually displaying in our data table. from the account object, and then where acts like a filter. So if you've ever put a filter on a report or a list view, same concept here. And using this like again with my percentage signs here, front and back of this input, basically means I want to use it as a contains instead of a starts with or an ends with. By moving those percentages, if I had one at the beginning and not at the end, that's going to be a start with. One at the end but not the beginning would be an ends with. Again, both sides gives me a contains. So this is where basically if the name contains whatever's been put in this input field for company name on my screen, that's how it's making my query dynamic for what Datafetcher is going to pull. And then I also said only show me companies that are in here for type of sponsor. This demo org is used for several different things, so I wanted to limit what we were showing here today. You may or may not need that if you were to build this out yourself in the real world. But I'm actually pretty darn proud of what I did with this contact query formula. So my Datafetcher contact query actually is doing a number of different things. So I said, select my first name, my last name, and title so I can display those from my contact. And I said, I want you to pull these contacts where the account ID is equal to whatever was the ID of the selected row in my account table. So until I've selected something in my account table, it doesn't actually know what to pull contacts from. And I wanted to be able to narrow that down to only contacts of that specific account. After that, then I put in an if statement that says, if the point of contact first name field is not blank. So if it's blank, leave the query out. I don't want you to query for empty contact names. We're not going to have any anyway, at least we shouldn't. So I don't want you to include that because it's pretty much going to make my query blow up and not return anything because it doesn't know how to search for empty. So I said, as long as there's something in that contact name field, then go ahead and do the same thing. Filter so anything that's in there is included in the first name field. And then same thing for my last name. If it's blank, just don't include this part in the query. That's where the null comes in here at the end. But if there's something in that point of contact last name field, then I want you to include this query here that says search for any contacts that also have whatever's put in the last name field as part of that field as well. So that's how I can put a B in the first name and a J in the last name and have it actually limiting my data table to only things that match both of those independently of each other, but still work together. And then finally, I wanted to order it by last name just to keep it alphabetically, kind of visually appealing to my users and make it a little easier to wade through that data table if there happen to be a lot of options. So by putting all of this together in this formula, I was able to make that query dynamic and therefore display those results in my data table. And then finally, the last formula that I'll show at the very bottom was showing my opportunity name. So if I pull up my opportunity name formula, basically, again, I'm leveraging my blank value and I'm saying, if I selected an account match from my account table, use the name of that selected account. Otherwise, use whatever I put into that company name field. So if we're building a new account record, then we'll go ahead and leverage that instead of the existing. Then I wanted a hyphen between them. And then I have a formula for opportunity type that determines whether they've selected an exhibitor booth or a sponsorship or both. And so then finally, I use the get active event label from my custom metadata object to indicate for which event the sponsorship opportunity is related. So those three things together are making my opportunity name formula here that we're putting on that page. So after we get through that first screen for sponsorship options, then I need to do a decision. Did I actually launch this from a lead? If I did, then I need to go down the left path and we're going to use an Apex action. So there's just a little bit of code written behind here. Don't worry, I didn't write it myself. I stole it off the internet. Thanks, Rakesh Gupta, for your wonderful blog on how to do Apex actions to convert leads within Flow. And so this is going to be set up. Again, we make the assumption that we're creating a new account, a new opportunity, and a new contact and not creating any duplicates. You could definitely fancy this up a little bit to take those into account with your lead conversion here. But because those are standard functionality, I needed to go ahead and update the account, the contact, and the opportunity with information from the screen. So as soon as I do that, because that's passing me back that information from my Apex action here, I can use that to find and update the appropriate account, contact, and opportunity. So for example, what I can do is my ID is the converted op that's being passed from my action. And I can go in here and I can actually set the close date, which is equal to the committed payment date. I can update the name to my opportunity name, set a stage, set a type, and then set the amount field based on my final total of that sponsorship with the discount included. Now, if we're not launching this from a lead, then we'll go down the right path. And so then I need to check and see, did I select an existing account from my data table, or did I put in all of the information to create a new one? And then take the appropriate path here. Same thing for contact. If I'm using an existing contact, we're assuming we didn't need to update any of that information, but if we're creating a new contact, we'll do that here. And then regardless, we need to create the new opportunity. So we're going to do that and create all of those same fields plus a few more and associate it to the appropriate account. Now, the beauty of this is when you create this op, the point of contact actually becomes your primary contact role. So I did not need to do that independently. It was part of this create op process. Then after this, we use a series of decisions to actually create the opportunity products or the opportunity line items. So I go through and decide, did we select something from the exhibitor table? If yes, then we're going to use that information to create the opportunity line item for the exhibitor booth. So just the key fields that we need to set for that is we need to set it to our opportunity ID. We need to get the price book entry from that table and put that in as the price book entry. We're setting the quantity to 1. We're grabbing the unit price to put as the sales price. And we're going to add this to a collection so that we can create these in bulk after we're done with all of our decisions. So we also go through this and decide whether we're adding a demo jam, if they selected a sponsorship, and finally, if the payment terms that they committed to entitle them to a discount. And then after all of that has been set and added to that collection, we're going to do one fell swoop to create our opportunity products. So again, bulkifying so we have fewer calls to the database and staying within those governor limits. And then our second screen, instead of our 7th or 8th screen, the way we would have had to build this before, is just the success screen that tells us everything has completed successfully. It gives my users a warm, fuzzy feeling, and then also offers the ability for us to create a link to the opportunity record and display that. And so I'm just going to pull up the opportunity link formula. And so this is great. It leverages the API in here for you to be able to pull a dynamic front part of your URL. So that's the part up here in the URL that's with the lightning.force.com. Using this API in the formula here, this is dynamic. I won't have to rebuild this or change it when I move from sandbox to prod. It's always going to work. At the very end, I've added the target, which is the ID of the opportunity record that we wanted to navigate to. And this is how we build the link to the opportunity, so we can put that on the page and give it one-click access for our users at the end of our flow. So with the Data Fetcher component and the reactive screen formulas and display text variable or display text components, I was able to take this from probably an 8 or 9 screen flow that users would have had to flip-flop back and forth and say, okay, I'm going to select this and I'm going to select that. Now, what's my total? Oh, I don't really like that. Let me go back and make some other changes, or worse, pull out a calculator and do it, by hand. And I've been able to pull this all into basically one guided screen wizard for everyone to use, and then just a final success screen lets them know everything that needed to happen behind the scenes was done successfully, and again gives them a one click to get to that new opportunity record.
Wow. I love reactivity and all the cool things that it can do. Thanks so much, Michelle, for sharing that with us. And for those attending Dreamforce next month, September 12th to the 14th in San Francisco, check out Michelle's session. Can you share with us a little bit more about that for the audience?
So yeah, I'm actually going to be presenting with Eric Smith at Dreamforce. He was another amazing Flownatic and has built so many wonderful components on unofficialsf.com. And he and I are going to be demonstrating more reactivity, both with the standard components that Salesforce has offered, and also Eric's going to showcase some very cool custom components he has built to take advantage of that reactivity as well. So we don't have dates or times, but take a look at Agenda Builder when it's live, and you'll be able to find us at Dreamforce.
Great, thank you. All right, we're going to move on to Adam. Hello. So we just saw
Hello,
some
hello.
pretty cool stuff by Michelle and Josh. What more awesome reactivity stuff can we expect in the upcoming releases?
Yeah, sure. So they were showing some pretty bleeding edge stuff. I think they mentioned that it was all Winter 24, which hasn't hit sandboxes yet. So they were using an org supplied by me. So they had the hookup. But what I'll do is I'll talk about the things coming for GA and then talk about some more forward facing items. And don't fret, I have all of this coming in a blog post on the admin's Salesforce admin's website. So be on the lookout for that. I guess by the point this is live, we should have it live. So just check it out as part of the Learn More series. All right, so what's coming for GA? Let's start at the top. One of the biggest things that the beta didn't have was choice selections. So if I make a selection in a pick list, a radio button, those changes didn't propagate to other components. So now with GA, I'm pleased to say, changes in choice components and components influencing choice components can now be used. So classic use case, there are two that I have on this screen here. One is like if I select a row from a data table and I want to pre-populate an opportunity stage pick list. Or another use case which has been requested for quite a while is what if I select a choice in one place on my screen and I want to automatically select another choice. So scenario here might be if I select a return reason, I want to automatically select a return type. And that's all done with default values and formulas, similar to how everything else is done with reactivity. All right, so what's next? The other thing, and I'm glad we teed this up throughout the presentation, but the other thing coming is global variable support. So things like custom labels, custom settings, information in the flow itself. These are all things that could not be referenced in Reactive Formula's last release, but are now coming in this upcoming release. So you saw Michelle utilize it in her demo there. What if you wanted to take away logic that you're storing in the flow around a discount percentage? So in this scenario, what if I didn't want the user to select a certain discount percentage if like I had the power to do that? You wouldn't necessarily want to do that hard-coded in a flow because you might want to control that outside of your flow. Well, this is where reactive global variables come into play, where you can put those things into custom settings or custom labels to store that. And now with I'll cover this in a minute, but with reactive display text coming, you might want to put different custom labels in your display text that can be translated. That's going to be a biggie for our partner teams, for example, and our AppExchange partners. So some other smaller features, but small but mighty, in some cases quite large in importance. The first one is when you set up reactivity in your screen, before during the beta, you would have had to have changed fields in order to get reactivity to run. Now, if reactivity can run the first time a screen loads, it will run, which is great for times where you've got like a data table selection automatically selected, and that feeds into other fields on the same screen. We've also added some new reactive formula functions, namely substitute, the exponent function, add months, and isPickVal. So picklist before, I think we had some issues with picklist before, but now with our GA, you can expect those to work as they typically do between screens. And then lastly, we've added some accessibility improvements. So if a component changes on your screen due to a reactive change, we will now announce a generic message that, hey, something is changed on your screen. And this also, fun fact, retroactively, it works for conditional field visibility. So even a feature that we didn't have to GA this release, it's now supported for that too. So next up, this is not part of the GA, so you do have to opt into this, unfortunately, but it is something that you can take advantage of if you're okay with some of the considerations. So display text, which I think is one of the most exciting things about reactivity, can now real time show changes in your screen. So the classic example here is something like a loan calculation where you're doing math on a screen and you want to show that math real time to your users in a way that looks good to you. That is now in beta, so you make sure you go into enable it in process automation settings. And the key difference is, and really one of the main reasons why it's in beta, is because the look and feel is a little different when you're calculating things reactively versus showing it in between screens. So things like the currency symbol are missing, or it might not respect the number of decimal places. So there are some things that we need to iron out for GA, but we didn't think that it warranted holding it back from you all taking advantage of it. So I'm really excited about this one, and the team was super happy to be able to get this out, this release, because we weren't quite sure when we started. And not only am I going to talk about some reactivity things coming, but I'm also going to cover two really nice quality of life improvements. One is we've added the revisited screen value setting for all of our components. So before it was restricted to just certain components. Now you can take advantage of it for things like choices, text, number, currency, long text area, date, and date time. The classic scenario here was like, what happens if you have a data table row in your first screen, and your next screen you reference your selected row in the last screen, and then you go back, you change it, and you go forward. Well, before this setting, you would have had to have been stuck with the very first time that you selected your row from the data table, and now you can refresh anything that's happened in between those screens. So a big gap that I'm really happy we were able to fill this release. And lastly, but certainly not least, is I think one of the bigger paper cuts that people encounter when they build screen flows. And that is when you go back a screen, when your screen hits an input error, or when you resume a flow. Oftentimes, unless you have set the default value of that component, your values will be lost. And I'm pleased to say this is now fixed, as long as you're running API version 59 and above, which is the API version for Winter 24. Super happy. There were so many workarounds that people were doing for this, and I'm really happy that people will no longer have to do this. All right, let's talk a little bit about reactivity and the roadmap. So summer 23, we introduced reactive formulas in our beta, with our Winter 24 GA selections are now reactive on top of the other things that I covered. Next release, we are hoping to GA display text, so being able to respect things like the date formats, currency symbols, things like that. Long text area is not currently reactive. We want to make that reactive. It uses a format very similar to display text, so those two kind of go hand in hand together. So you can expect long text area reactivity along the same timeline. And in the future, we want to look at making text templates reactive. So those are commonly used in display text to reuse values so that you don't have to make changes in multiple places in your display text. And then I'll talk a little bit more about this in a moment, but one of the things that's big about reactivity now is using data that you have in your screen. Of course, not factoring in the awesome Datafetcher component, but right now you don't have a out-of-the-box way of getting data into your screen. We're going to start venturing into that territory next with what we're calling action buttons, which I'll talk about in a second, and then dynamic choices or dynamic choice options. And that's going to come in the form of collection choice sets and record choice sets. So I call this the Holy Grail use case, being able to select an account and then generating a list of contacts in the form of like a radio button. That's been long requested, and I'm happy to say that we are working on it. And that's going to just totally blow open the doors of what screen flows can do. Really excited about that. And then before I go, just some quick samples of what I was talking about there. So dynamic choice sets, here you've got your account and a lookup, and then you generate a set of contacts. Really excited about the use case. And then also what we're looking at adding is conditional read-only disabled and required for all of our components. Also a very hotly requested item to be able to make an input read-only disabled or required. So we are going to be starting that next year. So I'm really excited about that as well. And then lastly, to wrap things up, the next era of reactivity is around getting data into your screen. So I'm happy to show off action buttons, which are going to be a way to basically run auto launch to bring in more data. So basically, the way I would think about it is think Datafetcher, but with a button. And instead of a Sasol query, you're running a flow. And so this is going to just open the floodgates of what's possible with screen flows, right? Because you could do far more than a Sasol query. You could call out to an external system, like in this animation above, where you're doing a call out to some sort of endpoint like USPS or UPS to get pricing on shipping. A very basic use case of searching for contacts or cases and populating a data table, doing a transform with our brand new transform element that's coming soon. There's just so many cool things that you're going to be able to do with action buttons. And eventually, we'd like to get to the point where we can do something like this with Datafetcher, where you can specify criteria to run these actions. But baby steps first. And by baby steps, I mean still very large steps. Through action buttons. So be on the lookout for this early next year. Hopefully we'll have something to show at TDX next year. That's all I got, Jen.
Well, I'm super excited to get my hands on all these cool features in the future. So thank you so much. So Adam, for those attending Dreamforce next month, what sessions can they expect to see? Do you have any that you'd like to highlight?
Yeah, sure. So screen flows are a hot item. I think we've got 3 different sessions on reactivity. I'm actually presenting with Eric and Michelle in their session to show off some of this very similar stuff around the roadmap. So I'm excited about that. I'll be also in the developer keynote. So I'll be showing off all the cool stuff coming for screen flows, flow in general. We got a really cool use case brewing and an all-star demo crew helping me build that vision. And we've got a great roadmap session as well with Sam Reynard. And we'll be showing off all kinds of cool stuff coming for Flow Builder, not just screen flows. So make sure you bookmark that session as well.
And I'm going to give a shout out to the admin release readiness live that will be coming also to you at Dreamforce. So check that out. Diana Jaffe and Sam Reynard will be there.
Yes, thank you for the reminder. Can't miss that one. I presented at that one last year. It was awesome.
Great. All right, so we're going to go and recap what we learned in today's episode. So from Josh, we learned how to provide a better UI design when getting records and displaying them to your users. And we learned how simple custom components can provide tons of values to your user and what's next for Datafetcher. And then from Michelle, we learned which types of screen components currently support reactivity, how reactive formulas can be used to calculate values and display them on screen flows without having to go to another screen, and how other types of formulas like text formulas can be used to create dynamic default field values. And if you aren't attending Dreamforce and didn't catch the original episode, no problem. Check the URL that you see on your screen to watch the video on demand. And we'll be coming back live here on the Salesforce Admin's YouTube channel in October with use cases from 2 trailblazers who use Flow to solve things that you do in your own personal lives. From Trailblazers Kenya Shakur and Salesforce MVP Mary Tagler. So Kenya will show us how she created a Flow to manage her budget, and Mary will show us how she used Flow to manage her blood pressure with a tracker. So subscribe to our Salesforce Admin's YouTube channel so that you can be aware of the new content, and we'll let you know when the live stream page is up. So now it's your turn. Check out these URLs that you see on the screen. Learn more by hitting the trails, complete the Reactive Components Resources Trail Mix, and then read Adam's blog from the Learn More Summer 23 Reactive Screen Components Beta. And if you want to learn more about reactive screen flows, As Adam mentioned in his segment, stay tuned for even more blog posts coming in September as part of the Learn More Trail Mix, where you can learn more about Winter 24 release updates. And lastly, watch Adam and Sam Reynard's TDX 23 session on Salesforce Plus, Next Generation Forms powered by ScreenFlows and Reactivity. And get great content produced for you, admins. Visit our website, admin.salesforce.com, to find the latest blogs, podcasts, and videos. And listen to the Salesforce Admins podcast hosted by Mike Gerhold and Jillian Bruce at all the places that you get your podcast content. And watch past episodes of Automate This via our playlist on the Salesforce Admins YouTube channel. So thank you for being my guests on Automate This, Michelle, Josh, and Adam. That was a lot of great content that we shared today on screen reactivity.
Thanks for having me. It was awesome.
Thrilled to be here. Thanks, Jen.
Yeah, a lot of fun.
All right, and thank you for all of you for joining us for this Automate This episode. I look forward to seeing you at future sessions. And remember, the best way to be notified when we live stream is to set the reminder on the live stream episode page, and you'll get an email reminder the day of the event. And we'll also post upcoming sessions on all of our various social channels, so follow us on Twitter at Salesforce Admins, LinkedIn, and the Trailblazer community.